Good evening and welcome to the June 1st, 2020 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to have everyone go on mute except for Neil Harris, who will lead us in the pledge. Go right ahead, Neil.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Neil. For reflection tonight, I think it's fitting to say a few words, make a few statements about the world around us. To say this has been a very difficult time is a giant understatement. Close to a quarter of the nation's workforce is currently unemployed. Most of the country has been under some level of quarantine for 2.5 months, which has upended everyone's daily routines and added immeasurable stress and anxiety to people's lives. And this past week, we passed a horrific milestone. COVID-19 has taken more than 100,000 American lives. It's an almost unimaginable number. It's more than the entire population of our city. And our sincere and most heartfelt wishes go out to all near and far who continue to be impacted by this pandemic. Then last week, the world saw the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. George Floyd was 46 years old. He was the father of 2 daughters. He's remembered by those who knew him as a good friend and coworker. He was unarmed. Police supposedly wanted to question him about or arrest him for a nonviolent transgression. And the fact that these circumstances led to his death is both tragic and utterly unacceptable. On behalf of the city of Gaithersburg, I offer our condolences to his family and all whose lives he's touched. In the wake of his death and the ensuing unrest across America and beyond, the members of the City Council and I stand in solidarity with those who are, in a peaceful and civil manner, calling for justice for George Floyd, his family, and victims of injustice everywhere. We reject calls for violence, as injustice does not solve injustice, it creates more victims. We must make the world a better place by lifting each other up and not tearing each other down. It is all of our civic duty to try to bring about change where it's not only needed, but long overdue. And we salute all who are working toward that end. In Gaithersburg, we stand as committed as ever to the principles of inclusiveness, fairness, respect, and professional service, not only in our police department, but in all of our departments. We wake up every day hoping to make you proud and proud of your city and proud of the manner in which we provide services. You deserve the best. Along those lines, at the end of the meeting, I have a statement to share with you from our police chief, Mark Sroka, who would have been here with us tonight, but he's been out in the field all day and is still out in the field, ensuring everyone's safety at the protest that took place over in the Rio area. So we'll revisit this a little bit later. And I thank you all for listening to that. So next, we're going to move on to approval of minutes. And tonight we have one set of minutes from the meeting held on May 18th. What is the pleasure of the council? If someone wants to raise their hand to make a motion, please do. Go ahead, Lorianne.
Mayor, I'd like to move the approval for the regular session minutes from May 18th, 2020.
Great. Mike?
I'll second.
Okay, we'll call the roll. Councilmember Sesma?
Aye.
Oh, I should say, vote aye if you're in favor, vote nay if you're not. Councilmember Wu?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel?
Aye.
Councilmember Sales?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are adopted unanimously. Next on our agenda is public comments. Tonight we have 3 people who are signed up for public comments. Tech team, do we have Brother Geronimo Plantsbaum with us?
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. It looks like the invitations for the public comments did not actually go out on time. That was my bad, and I apologize for that. I am monitoring to see if they are still able to join, because I did send out the invitations late, and I'll let you know if any of them show up. So perhaps you could do public comments later if they do.
Okay, yes. If they show up, let us know. We'll try to accommodate.
My apologies, sir.
These things happen. And as always, for those who are signed up tonight, anybody else who wishes to comment on anything, you can send us an email either directly or to cityhall@gaithersburgmd.gov, and anything you send to us will be considered just as any public testimony would be. So with that, the next item on our agenda is from the mayor and city council, and I'm going to start with Council Vice President Sales.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the comments that you made before we started our meeting. I have a few comments of my own that I wanted to share as well. So which knee offends you more? I saw a post on social media circulating and felt the need to respond. The post read as follows: looted nothing, burned nothing, attacked no one, changed the world with the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. front and center. Unfortunately, the pain that we are seeing from protesters in the media outlets, from the Capitol to Beverly Hills, Manhattan, Canada to overseas in Berlin, and even those who don't have access to technology, the Amish and Mennonites, don't agree that the world has changed. People are protesting because the world has not changed enough to prevent what we've experienced for now 7 days and counting. A riot is the language of the unheard. I'm struggling to catch my breath as we continue to monitor and address the pandemic developments, tend to those in need, balance the budget in preparing for a more equitable and just future. And now the same community that has been disproportionately affected by the pandemic is now at the center of fighting a new public health crisis. Well, not so new. Racial injustice and excessive use of force at the hands of corrupt law enforcement officers. I'm struggling to make sense of why we are divided behind what we witnessed in the video of George Floyd's murder. From crying out for relief to crying out for his mother before succumbing to asphyxiation by the lawlessness of this now incarcerated officer awaiting the fate of his criminal charges. I'm struggling to find a path forward when we're addressing the same circumstances that tore our country apart decades ago. And we have yet to see the systematic changes necessary to dismantle an unjust system that doesn't work for Black lives, who are 5 times more likely to die in police custody than any other population in the world. I'm struggling to understand why people are surprised or confused by the protests taking place. When Colin Kaepernick tried to conduct a silent protest by kneeling on the ground during the national anthem, and people misconstrued his attempt peacefully protesting the loss of innocent Black lives while in police custody, the National Football League did everything to silence him when he spoke up. Now entering the 7th night of protests, we cannot possibly be confused by the outpouring of individuals who are peacefully protesting the lawlessness that precipitated the knee in George Floyd's neck. Which knee offends you more? Maybe you forgot the unjust murder of Trayvon Martin and subsequent case that followed, didn't have a video to document the actions that led to his untimely death, and the self-empowered civilian turned murder was not convicted. Shortly after, the Eric Garner murder was captured on video, and those same blood-curdling screams were heard. "I can't breathe." No justice was served by the officers involved as they used an illegal chokehold to subdue and murder the man who was selling loose cigarettes on the street. To Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland, You're blessed and lucky if you make it back home to your family. Now I feel like the Purge movie is playing out in neighborhoods across the country because people are struggling to make sense of why their pleas for change have largely been overlooked. Bills calling for change, left in drawers, not receiving the attention they deserve, not getting a hearing. So while I fear for the lives of those in the community participating in peaceful protests, I pray for their safety. I thank them for their bravery and support their peaceful approaches to bring even more attention to an issue our ancestors tried unsuccessfully to resolve. Until we have a real police accountability law on the books across the country, this pain will not be soothed. The pleas for justice and accountability shouldn't be ignored or met with calls for law and order by the very human being who lacks such civility and simultaneously attacks peaceful protesters with gas and rubber bullets. This is America. While we struggle to make sense of our divided country, we can take comfort in knowing that there are leaders who sympathize with the oppressed. There are leaders that are committed to joining with the protesters to demand justice and accountability in our laws, and there are leaders who are making it their life's work to ensure a more just and equitable future for everyone. So what do we do in the meantime? I implore you to not rewatch the video. I wish I could take those 10 minutes of my life back. Where I witnessed the suffocation of an innocent life from an officer's knee on the neck of someone who was handcuffed, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And if you close your eyes when you watch it, it could have been a family member or a friend of any one of us. Don't get distracted by the true message of this movement. Justice for George Floyd, and drastic changes to law enforcement and accountability laws across the country. Don't stop peacefully protesting. When they go low, we go high and multiply. The protests are receiving national attention. But now that we have everyone's attention, don't let the message get lost in translation. By engaging in the same lawlessness, we abhor and condemn in solidarity with you. Don't stop at protesting with your feet, your voices, and signs. I hope and pray that everyone protesting in the streets is registered to vote. They've already voted by mail or will be registering at their local polling place on election day, or dropping their ballots at an official drop box location before the polls close at 8 p.m. The bottom line is this, and I'm quoting our former president, Barack Obama. If we want to bring about real change, then the choice isn't between protest and politics. We have to do both. We have to mobilize to raise awareness, and we have to organize and cast our ballots to make sure that we elect candidates who will act on reform. The more specific we can make demands for criminal justice and police reform, the harder it will be for elected officials to just offer lip service to the cause and then fall back into business as usual once protests have gone away. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorianne. That was wonderful. We'll move on to Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to associate myself with the comments that you made during the opening moment of silence and the comments of Council Vice President Sales. We all know, or should know, the quote from Dr. King that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And many of us know, and all of us should know, quotes from the author and activist Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, who said, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor and never the victim, and silence encourages the tormentor and never the tormented. And the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference." And he also said, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." I will never know what it's like to be a Black person in America. I like to think that as someone who has a Jewish ancestry and heritage, which I feel very close to, that I have some empathy for the idea of a group of people being called out for no good reason to be victims of institutionalized violence and genocide and other forms of discrimination for centuries up to and including today. That experience is not the same experience as African Americans, but I think whether you're African American or Jewish or have any other background of any kind, our common humanity calls us to be responsible, to love each other and support each other in these times. Today, I was proud to join the protest that was organized by high school students to march peacefully, passionately but peacefully, through our downtown Rio and downtown Crown neighborhoods in Gaithersburg. And I've got to tell you, it was a beautiful moment. It was a moment of people from diverse backgrounds. It was a moment of hundreds gathering together, trying to recognize a little bit of social distancing and wearing masks, but calling out for justice and for love and for peace. And I was really proud to be there today because it was the right thing to do to be there in this moment. And I also want to thank our law enforcement officers who were there to make sure that our protesters remained safe. Our city police department, our county police department, and I think I also saw some state troopers as well. And they really acted admirably to make sure that those of us who were there to exercise our First Amendment rights peaceably were able to do so. Councilmember Wu was there as well. And I think that as elected representatives who run our local government, we have a special responsibility not only to call out and condemn overt racism, but also to acknowledge the reality of institutional racism. And systemic racism is ultimately about the assimilation into the collective and communal subconscious over the course of generations of behaviors and tendencies that disproportionately and unjustly harm minorities, which then become embedded in our governments, our businesses, our organizational structures, our educational system, our culture. To be sure, there are unfortunately still too many people who are consciously and intentionally racist in our society, including some in positions of influence and power. But there are also far too many Americans who try to ignore the issue or look away or explain it or blame it away with some other explanation for fear of having to confront the uncomfortable truth of systemic racism and risking having to deconstruct the worldview painted by their own privilege or ignorance. But the good news is there are many, many, many of us who are trying to make the world better and trying to confront this issue one step at a time, one protest at a time, one debate at City Hall at a time. There was a speaker at the march today, a teenage girl who got up and said quite eloquently that this is not a moment about us versus them. Rather, it is a moment about all of us versus hate, all of us versus injustice, and all of us in support of building a better community and a better country and a better world. And so I am proud to again, join in the comments that have already been made. I'm proud to have been able to have attended and lent my voice as an ally and a supporter of the cause to that peaceful protest today. And I'm proud of the way that protest was run and handled on all fronts. And I think it's a great reflection of the values that we have here in the city of Gaithersburg. And I think we need to recommit ourselves today to that. Unfortunately, this is all happening against the backdrop of a pandemic that has not gone away, and I don't want us to lose sight of that as well. Lorianne already mentioned that health disparities are a major piece of systemic racism as well, and it is minority communities that are hardest hit by COVID-19. But I think we need to continue, as we are concentrating rightfully on this issue of the fallout and the reaction to what happened in Minneapolis and what has happened many, many times in many other cities. We also need to remember we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and we need to continue working to serve our community and to try and improve that situation as well. On a little bit of a more, hopefully a happy note, I want to congratulate all the folks at NASA and SpaceX for the successful launch of the Crew Dragon shuttle this past week. It was very exciting. I know many of us followed that. And I have said that while some might consider that to be an unnecessary distraction in a time when we're dealing with so many crises, I like to believe, and I do feel that our continued quest for discovery and knowledge in space exploration, peaceful space exploration, really can inspire all of us to be our better selves here on Earth. And so I hope a lot of us took the opportunity to share it with our children and to be inspired and to remember to recommit ourselves to the important work to serve all of humanity as we go forward. And I want to echo what Lorianne said about voting. By now, hopefully everyone knows, but it can't be said enough. We have a primary election in Montgomery County and in all of Maryland tomorrow. So if you have your absentee ballot, fill it out, but do not drop it in the mail. Make sure that you take it to a post office and actually get it postmarked tomorrow so that it will count when it arrives, or alternatively, drop it in a Dropbox tomorrow before the deadline to make sure that it gets counted, because it's just too late to drop it in a mailbox at this point to ensure that it will get counted. If you did not receive your ballot, you can go to the County Board of Elections, which happens to be in Gaithersburg, and get a ballot and have it filled out and drop it off or get it postmarked by the deadline tomorrow. This is an important election, even though it's a primary, and even though it may seem like the presidential election matchup is more or less set. We have an important Board of Election, a Board of Education race on the ballot, two of them actually, and we have judges on the ballot, and we have other offices on the ballot that really require us to be involved. And as Lorianne said, and as President Obama called on us to do, we need to not only protest, we also need to vote. So I really encourage everyone to do that. There is a ballot drop box at the Activity Center at Borer Park here in Gaithersburg if you get your ballot to that drop box before the deadline tomorrow. Some members of the mayor and council over the past week or two had the opportunity to participate in a Zoom meeting with our state delegation from District 17, Senator Kagan, and delegates Barve, Polakovich, Carr, and Gilchrist. It was an opportunity for us to advocate for the needs of our city. We appreciate them taking the time to reach out to us and organize that meeting as well. I want to, I'm sure the mayor will talk more about this, but I also want to continue to remind everybody the Gaithersburg Book Festival, the virtual Gaithersburg Book Festival continues with all kinds of programming continuing to roll on over these weeks. And my kids got to participate in one of the children's programs this past weekend with children's author Tom Engelberger on Sunday. And it was just absolutely a blast. And they really had a great time and can't stop talking about it. You can watch all the programs that have already aired on demand on the YouTube channel. and I'm sure the mayor will remind in more detail, but I just wanted to give him a shout out and a shout out to the entire virtual GBF team for continuing to do a great job and encourage the public to continue to look out for more content as it comes. And finally, I have a formal announcement. Notice to the general public is hereby given that the city of Gaithersburg is committed to adhering to the stringent guidelines necessary to help slow the spread of the coronavirus known as COVID-19. Until further notice, all meetings will be conducted virtually. The next work session of the Mayor and City Council will be held on Monday, June 8th, 2020 at 7:30 p.m. to receive an update on the city's stormwater program. This session will not be conducted in person, but will be held virtually by teleconference, online, and by phone. Instructions on how to view the meeting online or listen via telephone will be posted at least 24 hours prior to the meeting at www.gaithersburgmd.gov/virtual. The next regular session of the Mayor and City Council will be held on Monday, June 15th, 2020. To submit comments on Mayor and City Council matters, email mccservices@gaithersburgmd.gov. For more information, including the agenda, visit the city's website or contact the city manager's office at 301-258-6310 and leave a voicemail message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate your comments, and also I will talk a little bit about the book festival when it's my turn. We're going to go to Neil right now.
Thank you, Mayor. And we're all very shocked that you're planning to talk about the book festival. First of all, I want to thank you, Mayor Ashman, and my colleagues, Lori Ann Sales and Ryan Spiegel, for your eloquent words. These are very tough times. I'm sure that nobody expected 2020 to be as disastrous of a year as we're having. Many of us attended a press conference last week that was held here in the Kentlands in Gaithersburg with the county executive and our county health officer, Dr. Travis Gales, to announce the start of reopening of the county and county services and activities, which I know many of you have seen, and it was quite the talk of the town and the county. It was really a horrible display of rudeness by people who wanted the county reopened and wouldn't listen to the county executive talking about reopening. Look, these are tough times. This disease is not a political disease, it's a virus. I'm very concerned that we're moving maybe more quickly than we ought to, but I know everyone's concerned about making a living and getting a little stir crazy from being cooped up in their homes too much. But the last thing we need is for this to make a big comeback and sicken and kill more people. We've already had, as Mayor Ashman said, 100,000 Americans die, and that number is probably undercounted significantly because of the many deaths that aren't being attributed necessarily to the COVID-19 virus. I think that's really all I want to say. This is already going on for a long time, and everybody should stay safe and look out for each other. We're all in this thing together.
Thank you very much, Neil. We'll go on to Councilmember Wu.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a prepared announcement. After closed executive session, the closed meeting was held virtually by the Mayor and City Council on Tuesday, May 26, 2020, at approximately 5 p.m. pursuant to a motion adopted unanimously. The meeting was proposed to be closed pursuant to the General Provisions article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, Section 3-305B1I. The appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom it has jurisdiction. The topic discussed was the hiring and selection process for a new city manager. Present at the meeting were Mayor Ashman, Council members Harris, who arrived at 5:25 p.m., Sale, Sesma, Spiegel, and Wu. City staff present was Human Resources Director Yocklin. Also present was the consultant from the Novak Consulting Group, Catherine Tuck Parrish, Senior Manager. Upon conclusion of the discussion, the closed meeting was adjourned at approximately 6:59 p.m. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Lorianne and Ryan and Neil for your powerful words. Anything that I would add, I think, would just distract from the sentiment. So I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We'll move on to Mike. Mike, it looks like you're muted.
Yep.
Go ahead. Wait, now you're muted again, Mike.
Okay. I think I'm okay. Everybody can hear me. I want to thank my colleagues for their eloquence and inspiring words. I don't have that talent, so I will just make a few remarks related to what we've all been experiencing for weeks. 1619, 401 years ago. That's how long the knee of oppression has been. That's when the knee of oppression was woven into the fabric of this country. 401 years ago. And it's affected not only African Americans, families, people, humans of African heritage, also Native Americans and indigenous people of America, Asians who came here from many countries, Europeans, Jews, Latin Americans, many of whom were indigenous, but those who live in Central and South America. We've all felt it. Those of us who have that heritage have felt it in many different ways. It's been overt, it's been covert, it's been conscious, and it's been unconscious. And that's the definition of the institutionalization of this oppression. We've been waiting a long time for this change. I thought in my lifetime that these things, these actions, these attitudes would be gone, but it's sad that they aren't. So we have an opportunity to continue to work for change. Those of people of color like myself and my colleagues are working to do that as much as we can. We either do it in our private lives and our professional lives and our lives here as elected officials. I think the reminder that that everybody counts is important in the year of the census. It's also important to remind yourself that everybody counts when it comes to voting. That's the power that all Americans have to change the world that we live in addition to the actions of our collective actions and our individual actions. I've tried to do that for my life, my professional life, and I will continue to do so. I know my colleagues join me in that. So thank you for your words this evening, all of you. And I know that our residents feel strongly, many of them feel the same way. And hopefully they will respond not by their silence, but by their actions in support of these efforts. So I want to echo the reminder that tomorrow is an election day, a primary election day in the state of Maryland. There's still time. You have at least 24 hours to get your vote in. If you haven't filled out the census, there's still time to do that. And finally, I want to congratulate our new junior mayor, Hayden Sandlin. He's a fourth grader at Fields Road Elementary School. Actually, he may now be a fifth grader or soon to be a fifth grader. We had dozens of fourth graders submitted their essay, and Hayden was selected by our committee to be the next junior mayor. So also want to thank Diego and his family. Diego, as our former junior mayor, did a great job of representing the city. And I expect that Hayden will do just as well. So congratulations, we welcome Hayden. And again, we thank Diego for his great job. And I think that's probably enough. Thank you.
Mike, thanks a lot. I'm really glad you brought up the junior mayors because I know we all agree on the job Diego's done, and Hayden, I think, is our first junior mayor ever from Fields Road, which is awesome. And while it's not advertised as such, he did participate in his first sort of semi-official Junior Mayor Act. He participated along with Ryan's kids and several others. Tom Lonergan's son was in it too. In the book festival program on Sunday with children's author Tom Engelberger, which was outstanding, and all the kids were just so great. It was a delight to see. So we'll look forward to hopefully having many opportunities for Hayden to participate with us. As promised before, I'll give you the little book festival plug. We have 2 more weeks of book festival programming. It takes place Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Sundays being the children's authors. This week, Friday night, the live conversation, 5:30 p.m. is with a reporter from The New Yorker. Her name is Casey Sepp. This is her first book. It's called Furious Hours, and it is half of it is like a true crime story about this wild serial killer in rural Alabama in the 70s. And then the other half is about Harper Lee, and they're connected because Harper Lee was looking to finally write a follow-up to her, beloved classic, To Kill a Mockingbird. And she was going to use the trial of this particular serial killer as a model. She was reporting that story to try to build the next thing she was going to write about that. And it may have been a true crime story like her friend Truman Capote did. Anyway, it's a really good book. It's a young writer, went to, she's young, she's fresh out of Harvard and Oxford and writing for The New Yorker. It's going to be a really good conversation. Saturday, we have George Zaidan, who is an MIT space scientist, and his book is called Ingredients, the Strange Science of the Things We Put in Us and on Us. I read the book, and he's one of those science writers that can make things understandable to people like me, and entertaining, but really, really informative. I think this community with the deep science roots we have will really appreciate that presentation, which will be 7 p.m. on Saturday. And then Sunday, 11 a.m., our children's author is Linda Sue Park. She's kind of a legend. She's a winner of the Newbery Medal, a superb writer. I think this book is for sort of older middle grades to young teens. So it's an honor. It's the first time we'll have hosted her. It's a real honor. I hope you all can join us. Again, you can find out all you need at GaithersburgBookFestival.org. All the action's taking place on our YouTube channel. So hope to see you there. I just wanted to tell one more quick story. I can't, not about the George Floyd situation, because everybody's done a fabulous job really covering that and expressing our feelings about that. But I wanted to go back to the county executive's ill-fated press conference last Thursday. Several of us were there, and there was a moment after the press conference in which, I do a lot of preaching about making the world a better place and adding goodness to the world, and there was sort of a teachable moment for me, and I feel like sharing it just so everybody knows that when I talk about these things and being the change, I'm thinking of myself as well. It was after 10 or 15 minutes after the press conference, and keep in mind a number of us were there. We haven't seen each other in nearly 3 months. We're all friends. It's good to see everybody. We're in our sort of styling in our masks, and we decided to take a group photo together. And as we do it, one of the protesters came over to me and started giving me an earful about how, he hates politicians and all we're only here for the photo op and yada, yada. And first I ignored him. We took our picture, and then he came back sort of a little bit more aggressively at me. And this is where, I had a decision to make. And I feel like I really made the wrong one because I just sort of went back at him, yelled back, ridiculed, mocked him. And he yelled at me, and it went back and forth for a while until he got tired of it and went away. No doubt when he went away, he felt even more entrenched in his hatred, his stated hatred for politicians and how we're rotten and all we're there for is a photo op. And for me at that moment, it's sort of a natural reaction, and it felt good to defend myself and come back at him. But really what it was a missed opportunity for me. What I should have said to him was, let me hear about your concerns. Let me better understand what you have to say. Can we have a conversation? Because that's the lesson I'm preaching all the time to everybody. And I'm usually pretty reliable to do that, but this time I let it slip, and I regret it. I'm sort of disappointed in myself. So I want to acknowledge that it is not easy to lower the temperature when someone's there in your face yelling at you, but every time we can find the strength and the presence of mind to do it, that's when we make the world a better place. And I really, I doubt he's listening to our meetings, but I resolved to do better, and let the change just begin with me. And so I just wanted to state that publicly. I do think about these things and the behavior that I model, and I should have done better. So with that, I will move on from the acting city manager.
Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Mayor, I think we need a motion to go into executive session.
You are correct. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you would like to make the executive session motion. Okay, Neil, let's go to Neil.
I move that we go into executive session following the regular session today.
Second.
There's some specific specific language we want to read? Just make
Got it here. I'll make the motion.
Go ahead, Rob.
Oh wait, just the notice to the general public?
No, this one's the close. Oh yes. Wait a second. We don't have the motion. We'll make a motion. And just change it on the fly into a motion, Rob.
Oh, that's the right one.
It is the right one.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay, notice to the general public is hereby given that the mayor and city council of Gaithersburg plan to conduct a closed executive session virtually by teleconference online immediately following its session on Monday, June 1st, 2020. The meeting is proposed to be closed pursuant to the general provisions article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, section 3-305B8, to consult with staff consultants or other individuals about pending or potential litigation. The topic to discuss is the pending litigation in the Johnson et al. Versus mayor and city council matter. The closed executive session will be held pursuant to a motion properly adopted by the mayor and city council on Monday, June 1st, 2020. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I move that we go into executive session immediately after the conclusion of today's regular session.
Thank you. Ryan, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the motion incorporates by reference everything in the notice that Rob just read. Correct, Rob?
That is correct, Ryan.
And I will second that.
Ryan,
Lawyers saving other lawyers. I love it. Okay.
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second. I'll call the roll. Aye if you're in favor, nay if you're against. Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. That carries unanimously. We will now go on from the acting city manager.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members and members of the public. I just wanted to let you and also the members of the public know about two items. As the county moves into phase 1, which allowed for retail curb pickup and outdoor dining, the city last Friday put in place a new streamlined permitting process for retail establishments and restaurants that either don't have those features or want to expand those features. We have received already 2 applications under this new permit process, which is all done virtually or remotely. And if you need additional information, please go to our website. It's on the very front page of the website, and you can look at those. And I wanted to thank the planning and code staff, legal staff, and also the PIO staff for their quick response on that. We weren't quite ready to announce that, but we pushed it out as soon as we were able to on Friday.
Thank you,
I think
Dennis.
Rob,
I'm not cutting you off, but Rob raised his hand. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and sorry to cut in, Dennis. I just wanted to make sure, I was looking through the packet here tonight and on the website as well, that for those temporary permits for the 6 months, are we going to be charging the applicants fees to process those? And if we are, my preference would be that the city absorb those costs.
there's no fee associated with the new permit or any sign permit that would be required to implement the new outdoor dining or curbside pickup areas. So we waived all those fees already. And then the second item is, as we kind of move back into phased service restoration along with the county, I wanted to remind the public that we have resumed bulky item pickup for the month of June. And residents are encouraged to put out their items by 7 a.m. on your regular recycling day. You can go for more information to the city's website, or if you've already signed up for the city's recycling app, the Recycling Coach, you'll find the information there. And that's it.
Thank you, Dennis. Before we get into economic development, we have one of our public comment speakers who's now with us. Tech team, if you could bring up Nancy Anthracite, please, to speak. And Nancy, once you get on and unmute yourself, just state your name and go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. If I can get control of my computer here for a minute so I can find my comments, would be good. Because they disappeared when I took this over. Excuse me for this. Well, I can't seem to find them, so I will make extemporaneous comments.
That's fine. And you know what? If you find them, you can just email them to us as well.
All right. I did email them to you. Taking a look at the agenda, there were some items on it that I wanted to comment on, and I know it's going to sound very insensitive after the eloquent comments from the city council members, but I wanted to address two things. One was having 16-year-olds vote. I had a reference, and I have sent it to you, about the maturity and ability to reason at an adult level of young people. And it was a medical center reference saying that until age 24, that that people aren't completely mature for reasoning and making decisions. Now, I certainly don't think we need to have people wait to be 24, especially since they can fight battles on behalf of the United States as soldiers and die for the United States at 18. But I do think that we should be cognizant that there is a maturity level to making decisions, and that we should not have 16-year-olds voting. I think we make provisions to try and help make sure their judgment is good when they start to learn to drive at 16. And I think we know how well that sometimes works. So I'm hoping you will not vote to have 16-year-olds vote. My second comment had to do with the write-in candidates. I made comments about this last time, and I want to persist in saying that I think that write-in candidates should be allowed. I think the last election showed that there were 20% of the votes for write-in candidates, that the write-in candidates were from underrepresented communities for the most part, and maybe totally from unrepresented communities or underrepresented communities, and that the votes reflected a very important issue to a number of members of the community that would not have received the attention that it did had there not been write-in candidates. I think write-in candidates aren't generally aware of how far ahead they have to plan in order to become a candidate on the ballot. And I appreciate the incumbents, the effort and the expense and everything they go through in order to end up on the ballot. But being on the ballot is a good advantage. So I think that makes up for the fact that the write-in candidates were able to do it with much less work. And thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Nancy. We appreciate it. Okay, we will move back into our agenda, and I'll call up Tom Lonergan to give us our economic development update.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
All right, very quickly, just wanted to let you all know about another program that will soon be available to support our local small business community. Montgomery County's Micro Enterprise Stabilization Program will provide financial assistance to income-eligible for-profit businesses with 5 or fewer employees that have experienced a significant reduction in revenue as a result of the current public health emergency. Assistance is expected to be up to $10,000 per business, and the program is being funded through $1 million in community development block grant funds allocated by the county. While the program application is not yet available, a sample application can be viewed at Montgomery County, Maryland /Biz Resources. Applications will be accepted between June the 10th and 16th. It's a short time frame. So I assume the county will have it ready and soon. A list of eligibility requirements, I won't go through them all, but the business has to be physically located in the county, or the owner must reside in Montgomery County, and at least 51% of revenue must be generated in the county, has to employ 5 or fewer employees. They have to demonstrate that they experienced a loss of revenue due to COVID, and they cannot be delinquent in any city, state, or federal taxes, child support, or other penalties. Additionally, the business owner has to qualify as low income and provide required documentation, and the businesses that have received assistance from Montgomery County through the Public Health Emergency Grant are not eligible to receive funding from the Micro Enterprise Stabilization Program. We strongly encourage any city businesses who meet that criteria to apply for support when it becomes available. And very quickly, I just need to mention that under the administration's Operation Warp Speed program, HHS is leading a whole of nation effort with the primary goal to have a well-defined portfolio of COVID-19 vaccine candidates to maximize the probability of having 1 or more safe, effective vaccines as soon as possible for mass distribution. Earlier today, our friends at Emergent Biosolutions did reach out personally, asking me to let you know that Emergent was issued a task order valued at approximately $628 million to support the U.S. government's efforts to accelerate the delivery of COVID-19 vaccine candidates through 2021 and create a U.S.-based manufacturing supply chain for pharmaceutical and biotech innovators of leading COVID-19 vaccine candidates. We wish them well, along with Novavax and the other biotechs in the city working hard to find a cure. That's all I got.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Next item on our agenda, we'll move on to ordinances, resolutions, and regulations. The first item, Dennis is going to lead us in adopting our strategic plan.
Mayor and City Council, tonight we are requesting approval of a resolution for adopting the fiscal year 2021 strategic plan for the city of Gaithersburg. Just as a reminder, the Mayor and Council reviewed the draft document at the February 24th, 2020 planning retreat. Staff did make the minor revisions requested by the Mayor and Council at the retreat and are ready for its adoption. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Raise your hands if you have any questions or comments. Mike.
Great. Thank you. I know we've gone over this quite a bit. I'm happy with the strategic plan. I want to make sure One of the things that we noticed, we've all noticed, is the importance of being able to do things remotely. And in terms of the administration of the city and services to the public, I'm sure that the ability to obtain request and obtain services online and to do it with staff that are working remotely is going to be incorporated, I think, within the context of the strategic plan. That can be incorporated. I just want to make sure that that's clear. That should certainly be clear to our leadership in the city, our staff. But it is an important thing that we can certainly look forward to in the future. So that was the one element of the strategic plan that I thought isn't mentioned specifically in the strategic plan, but it needs to be addressed going forward. So I think we've adapted, the staff has adapted quite quickly to this, but we can certainly improve greatly on this, both in terms of how staff are able to work, but also the services that our public are able to obtain through this same effort. That's it.
Any other questions or comments? Not, would someone like to make the motion? Neil.
So one quick comment, actually, that for those in the public who are interested in reading through the annual strategic plan as well as the budget, if you go to the city's website, click on government and click on budget and strategic plan, it's all right there for you. It's a pretty lengthy document, but it's definitely worth going through to see the care and thoughtfulness that goes into planning department by department for the city. And with that, I would like to move approval of this year's strategic plan.
Mike.
I'll second that.
Okay, we'll call the roll. Aye in favor, nay opposed. Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you guys very much. Next, tag team, if you could bring up Rafiu Igile and Nate Bassett from our finance department. I think first we have our schedule of fees. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members. My item relates to the resolution to adopt the fee schedule. The proposed fee schedule, along with the summary of requested changes, was provided to with the proposed budget document in early April. There have been no changes to the fee schedule subsequent to the public hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the fee schedule.
Raise your hand if you have questions or comments. Not seeing any. Would somebody like to move approval of the resolution? Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So moved.
Okay. Lorianne.
Second.
Okay, we're going to call the roll. All those in favor, aye. Any opposed, say nay. Councilmember Sesma. I cannot hear Councilmember Sesma. I think I read his lips to say aye. Okay, Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay, that carries unanimously. Next, we have before us our budget. Rafiu, take it away.
Thank you again. The item on the agenda is on the adoption of the ordinance that will adopt the FY21 budget and the property tax rate. The city held a public hearing on this ordinance on April 20th. The proposed ordinance includes a tax rate that remains the same as it has been since 2011. During the budget hearing, we noted that revenues for for FY21 have been reversed down by $3.9 million due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, subsequent increases in HUD funding and a new grant have added approximately $557,000 in revenues. the impact of these revenues is net zero as expenditures also increased. Therefore, the downward revision in revenue now stands at $3.3 million. During the budget hearing, we provided expense reduction totaling $3.3 million. Subsequent revisions have reduced that to $2.6 million, primarily due to the increase in HUD funding and a new grant, as well as a $50,000 increase for safety net grants provided through community services. Dennis Esslinger will provide some details on these grants. The reappropriation increase discussed during the budget hearing was approximately $577,000. This has been reversed to approximately $725,000 with the removal of some reductions based on council input. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have on the ordinance, the subsequent events list, or the budget itself.
Dennis, did you want to add those details?
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple of comments. One is, Rafu noted, we have increased the budget for the community nonprofit program. Again, those programs support local nonprofits whose we look to help provide basic safety net services on education, financial and mental health support programs to the residents. To note, the FY21 budget is just over $1 million. In order that we can assure that we can bridge the gaps quickly during this time of need, we will be expediting the grant process a little bit different than we have done in the past. For the first 6 months of the FY21 budget, we will be utilizing our existing grant providers to get those grants up and running in a quick fashion. And after that, we will reevaluate during the second part of the year to see how they fit into any new federal, state, or county supported programs. Again, the focus, at least for the first 6 months, based upon what we're seeing are the community needs around food, housing, and financial vocational counseling services. So it's a little bit different process than we normally do. I just wanted to let the public know about that. We do feel like this is the best way to serve the residents in this time of need. And then the second comment, really, I wanted to thank staff. You know, when we came to the budget with you in terms of the budget hearing, we all knew we presented a budget that could not be funded under the projected revenue based upon the COVID and other situations in our community. And as Rafu noted, we ended up going back to staff and they were able to find $3.2 million in reductions. We did reduce that down based upon some additional community development block grant funding and a grant secured by the Community Services Division to 2.6. And so in a matter of quick time, staff did a great job balancing the budget again. It's one of the strengths that Gaithersburg is very good at being conservative in how we budget money, but also how we budget revenues, and I think we'll be on track. We also have the ability, should the financial revenues not come in, to look at a couple of other items in order to meet the projected revenue for 21.
Thank you, Dennis. I want to echo your congratulations and gratitude to staff because really at every step in developing this budget, before pre-COVID, we had a budget. Then COVID hit. We had to make some decisions on the fly, some very tough decisions. But I think at every step, the budget that you guys have put forward has been faithful to the values and priorities that we put into our strategic plan and that we talk about at all these meetings. So thanks to you and thanks to staff and somewhere up in Urbana somewhere, there's a guy who had a little to do with it too, Tony Tomasello. Thanks to all of you. Council members, do you have any comments or questions? Just raise your hand. If not, would someone like to move the ordinance adopting the budget? Mike.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I move the ordinance to adopt the budget for 2021.
Ryan.
Second.
Okay. We'll call the roll. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay. Adopted. Thank you all. Rafi, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just thank you all for the vote. I just wanted to mention that during the introduction of the budget, we did mention that based on the recommendation of GFOA, that our budget book was too large and that we plan to reduce the detailed line item details we currently have on the budget. That we're going to take that off the budget that will be published. And we are still hoping to do that, but we just wanted to make sure that the details will be available for anyone who needs to see them. But we are trying to make sure that we keep this in line with what GFOA recommended. As we know, as you all know, we received the Distinguished Budget Award for 18 consecutive years now, and we want to keep that streak going. And that was the only comment they've had so far on all the reporting that we've done on our budget. So our budget is excellent. We just want us to reduce it slightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Nate, it sounds like the pressure's on you to make sure we get it that 19th time and beyond. So Rafi just put it out publicly. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Next on our agenda is elections ordinances, and Lynn Board, you're going to lead us in these discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Brian, if you could please bring up the PowerPoint. I'm going to discuss items D and E together. So the PowerPoint deals with both the proposed changes to the charter, which is sections 8, 11, 7, and 29A, as well as changes to section 6C, or chapter 6C of the city code. Brian, if you go to the next slide, please. So by way of background, following every election, the city's Board of Supervisors of Elections looks at what occurred during the last election and works to make recommendations to the mayor and council as how to improve our election process. They did so following the 2019 election, and the mayor and city council and the Board of Supervisors of Elections held a joint work session on February 10th to debrief the most recent election. Coming out of that, there were a lot of discussion and some recommendations for both charter and code changes in order to implement those prior to the 2021 election. So what we have before us this evening is introduction of some of those ordinances. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about these kind of by categories. The first is write-in votes. As you all are aware that both the city charter and code currently allow write-in votes, and those were based on changes and amendments that were made in 2014. Prior to that time, we didn't allow write-in candidates. So those currently require a filing of a certificate of candidacy no later than 6 days prior to the first early voting session. And then the BOSE, the Board of Supervisors of Elections, they do certify candidates prior to the election. And all write-in candidates must comply with all of the city's campaign laws and rules and regulations. Next slide, please. So we did a lot of research on this issue, and we looked at other jurisdictions. Currently, out of the 157 municipalities in Maryland, only 25 allow write-in votes specifically by their charter. 8 specifically prohibit them. All of the others are silent on the issue, but by a practical matter, they do not accept write-in candidates. Next slide. So certainly in state and county elections, write-in candidates are allowed. They are what we have currently in our code and charter kind of mirror what's in the state law. It does require a certification of write-ins. Their time to certify as a write-in is very close to the election day. So certification must be filed by the Wednesday preceding the day of the election. They do have information about the write-in candidates that is published on the state website, and it's the same information that is published on the state's website for all other candidates. Next slide. As the mayor and council are aware, currently our charter and code and election regulations are silent on the issue of what promotion write-in candidates are provided. We did look at what other jurisdictions do. Again, there's not a lot of jurisdictions that allow write-in candidates, but we looked at Frederick, Tacoma Park, and Berlin. And in all of those jurisdictions, there's really no publication or promotion of the write-in candidates, other than in Tacoma Park, they do post the names of the certified candidates on their websites. Next slide, please. So on the issue of write-in candidates, the Board of Supervisors of Elections has unanimously recommended that we delete the charter section, which is section 27, as well as the code section allowing write-in candidates. And they had a couple reasons for this. First, they believe that the city has a very low bar for allowing candidates to enter the elections. You know, certainly there's a petition that needs only 100 signatures, and they think that that's fairly easy to obtain. As you all know, the staff does perform courtesy reviews of petitions to ensure that candidates have sufficient signatures prior to the closing of the date for submission of petitions. They were also concerned that the write-in candidates lead to uncertainty and delay in the election results and potentially confusion of voters. They did have a pretty significant concern with regard to absentee ballots. And this was an issue that was actually raised during the past election. Our absentee ballots are now available 60 days prior to the election, and the write-in candidates are not required to file until 6 days before the first day of early voting. As a result, that leads to a situation where there can be absentee ballots that are cast before all write-in candidates are certified, and the board was concerned about that issue, and that was the basis for their recommendation to delete the provision for write-in candidates. Next slide, please. The next issue I want to talk about is the voting age, and this was something that was not raised by the BOSC, but was, I guess, raised by the council during the discussion at the joint work session back in February. And there was discussion about changing the voting age from 18 to 16. Certainly Tacoma Park does have a voting age of 16. Montgomery County considered it probably about 4 or 5 years ago and chose not to make this change. They stayed with the 18 age limit. From a practical matter, it would raise some issues with regard to changing from 18 to 16. Currently, the city uses the county's voter registration list as our list for registered voters in the city. So as a result, people just have to register with the county, and that if you live in the city, that makes you register with the city. If we were to change to 16-year-olds, it would require us to maintain either totally our own separate list of voters, which would mean people would have to register with both the city and the county, or as what we've proposed in the ordinances before you tonight, or the charter revisions before you tonight, we'd have to maintain a supplemental voter registration process. And I think this was the primary reason why the Board of Supervisors of Elections unanimously recommended that the amendment to Section 27 not move forward based on the confusion and having to maintain those two separate voter registration processes. So next slide, please. Also not raised by the BOSC, but raised by the council during the joint public work session was the mayor's right to vote. And there's a proposed amendment to Section 8 of the charter that would give the mayor a right to vote, but only to break a tie. On this one, the BOSC made no recommendation because they felt that this really is an election issue. This is more of a process or decision for the mayor and council. Next slide, please. Related to the mayor's right to vote, there was also a suggestion by the council at the joint work session that if the mayor was given the right to vote, that section 11 of the charter be amended to remove the mayor's authority to veto the ordinances. I do want to note that in the draft ordinances, if the council would decide to move forward with this, we need to make just a couple additional changes to the language in section 11, because there are references to the veto and election in section 11C and 11D. So we would want to make those revisions if the mayor would choose, if the mayor and council would choose to move this for introduction. On this issue, again, the BOSC had no recommendation because they really didn't think this was truly an election issue. Next slide. So the next issue was absentee ballots. We did change the city code just prior to the last election in 2018. So in section 6C22, we extended the time period for receipt of absentee ballots to 2 days after the close of polls if they're postmarked on or before election day. So in this last election, the practical result of that was there were 6 absentee ballots that were received in that 2-day period, and those were included in the results. At that same time, back in 2018, we also extended the time period available for absentee ballots, where those would be available to the public, and we extended that from a 30-day period to a 60-day period. Next slide, please, Brian. So in this one, the BOSC unanimously recommended approval of the amendment to 6C22 to change the required receipt of absentee ballots to by the close of the polls on election days. And again, we have their rationale listed here. I think one of their factors was because we had extended the time where absentee ballots were available, that we had made it easier to timely return absentee ballots. And that was the change from the 30 days to the 60 days. We also made it easier by allowing individuals to download from the city's website applications for absentee ballots, and that they could submit those via email, the applications, not the ballots themselves. And then we also started paying for the return postage on the ballots. Some of the BOSC's rationale also for not wanting to move forward with this, or wanting to move forward with this change, is that potentially there could be an issue if you have an absent or unreadable postmark of what to do with that particular ballot. Is it accepted or is it not? And they also believe it leads in uncertainty and delay in election results. So next slide. So the last set of ordinance revisions that are before you this evening are all related, and they're to sections 6C5, 6C7, and 6C9, and these deal with campaign finance reports. Under all of those sections, it currently requires that a campaign finance report include contributions received and expenditures made through the day immediately preceding the date of filing the report. What we heard from at the joint work session was that there was some difficulty in the short time period to ensure that you had, up to date and all your information for filing in those reports during that time period. So these amendments would require the campaign finance report to include contributions and expenditures through 3 days prior to the date of filing of the report. We used 3 days, although there was some discussion of whether 2 days was more appropriate, but for introduction purposes, we figured it was better to put in the longer number of days, and it could always be amended down to a shorter number of days through the public hearing process. And for this change, the BOSC did unanimously recommend approval of these proposed revisions. Next slide, please. So while the issue is not really before you this evening for an ordinance change, we did include in the presentation some information by vote by mail, and a lot of this was discussed during the joint public hearing. So I'm not really going to go through the next couple of slides in too much detail. So again, Brian, if you could go to the next slide, and then probably the next slide, and then let's go one more. So this is the BOSC's current recommendation on the vote by mail process. They would like to obtain some additional information on the process. So we did receive the City of Rockville's Board of Supervisors of Elections did issue a report it was probably back in the end of February, might have been the beginning of March, kind of discussing their vote by mail process and how that went, and that report has been provided to the city's Board of Supervisors of Elections. They also kind of wanted to see how tomorrow's primary vote goes, because that is a primarily a vote by mail election. And based on gathering that information, they felt that they would be in a better position to make a recommendation as to whether the 2021 election should be a vote by mail process. They've also suggested undertaking some type of public outreach process, either a forum or a survey, just to kind of gauge the public interest and public support for implementing vote by mail. So at this point, they're not recommending any changes to the code or charter in order to implement vote by mail. We would not necessarily need code or charter changes. Those are something that could probably be done by the city regulation process, which would be a shorter process to approve those steps. Next slide, please, Brian. So what the next steps are, you have before you this evening, as we discussed, 4 separate charter changes, as well as changes to Chapter 6C of the City Code for introduction. If the Mayor and Council would choose to introduce all or some of those ordinances, we would propose holding a public hearing on July 6th, hold the record open to July 20th, with anticipated policy discussion on August 3rd. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I'll just start by saying this is this is the introduction process, a question of what we introduce, and not necessarily the time to get very deep into some of these matters, but whether it's a question whether we want to take them to public hearing. I'll say I am generally inclined initially to toward the recommendations of the Board of Supervisors of Elections, and I would, if these items do make it to introduction, I'll look forward to hearing what the public has to say and what my colleagues have to say. Regarding the 2 items about the mayor's power, the mayor's right to vote, the mayor's ability to veto, these, of course, I've just as the grass is always greener on the other side, and it'd be nice to have a vote on some of these matters. On some of them, maybe it's better I get to stay quiet and let you guys didn't make the hard decisions. Although I usually say I would vote anyway. But these 2 items are not up for our consideration because I put them there. I'm not agitating for the right to vote, and I certainly don't. If you're not going to give me the right to vote, I certainly don't want to have my one power, a veto, taken away. So I hope you guys will be considerate of those things, and raise your hand who'd like to go first again, just to discuss what we would want to introduce. I saw Lorianne's hand. Lorianne, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lynn, and to the Board of Elections for putting together these recommendations. I did have a few questions. The first was about the 16-year-old's right to vote. I know that you included information about other jurisdictions where other things were happening. And so I was wondering if you had any information about the age, the lowering of the voting age, other municipalities in the state that allow 16-year-olds to vote.
Yeah, at this point, the only one that I'm aware of is Tacoma Park.
Okay. Can we confirm that before the hearing?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question about the packet page 251, pros and cons of vote by mail. Who put together this list of pros and
this was put together, actually the same slide was used at the joint public hearing. Okay. So this was put together in conjunction with between staff and BOSE.
Okay. I mean, now that we are going through a vote by mail process, I'm glad that we'll get to see the security of this process play out, and we'll be able to evaluate how we want to see that, should we consider it in the city. So just want to make sure that we don't question the security and legitimacy of vote by mail elections, and that's not communicated to the public. Thank you. That's all.
Who'd like to go next? Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to take these sort of one by one. As for the write-in candidates, I mean, we had an extensive discussion about this when we had our joint hearing with the Board of Supervisors of Elections some weeks ago. And so I don't think we need to rehash all the detailed discussion. I do want to reemphasize what the mayor said earlier. What we're considering right now is merely an introduction for further public hearing and discussion, and then some potential final vote down the road, probably in July. So we're not talking about making any final decisions tonight. I just want the public to be clear about that. We're just talking about opening up the official debate and discussion on whether to make these changes. As for write-in candidates, again, as I said at our joint public hearing, I have some mixed feelings about this. I'm not sure that I'm all the way there at the point where I would vote in favor of completely getting rid of write-in candidates, but I do agree that there are a lot of technical, logistical problems and procedural problems that are created. And I also want to emphasize to the public that it was the Board of Supervisors of Elections who came to us with this recommendation. We did not put it in their heads. We did not ask them to look at it. It was their idea. They came to us. I know there are a few people in the public who've expressed concern about the timing of this recommendation, but I just want to again say it had nothing to do with any instigation from the mayor or the council. Having said that, I do feel, as I said previously in the joint session, that I do not think the write-in candidates, if they're allowed to continue, should have any support or identification whatsoever by the city, either having their name listed on a ballot, having their name listed on a card or a poster in the polling place. I don't think their name should be identified on any public marketing materials about the election that are produced by the city. I don't think their name should be on the city website under the elections tab. But I'm not sure that I necessarily fully support getting rid of them altogether. Having said that, again, this is just for an introduction. I'd be willing to vote to introduce this for further discussion and hearing, and then we can make our final decisions at a later date. And I do understand a lot of these problems that the Board of Supervisors of Elections has identified, which really make it difficult for them to do their job of overseeing, processing the election, and making it workable. So I would be supportive of the introduction, but I'm not sure exactly how I would vote at the end of the day after the process. As for the voting age, I think the biggest logistical and technical problem here is that the city of Gaithersburg relies on the county's voter rolls. And I think it would be potentially a big additional responsibility for the city to have its own separate rolls to process, to oversee, to update, to indicate that someone who is under the age of 18 is eligible to vote. So, I'm generally amenable to a discussion about it, but I think that's really the big hurdle in terms of the logistics. And I'm just not sure how we get around that, and I'm not sure we're at the right moment to be taking on some big new bureaucratic responsibility to maintain our own voter rolls. And so again, I'm not exactly sure how I'd vote on that at the end of the day, but I'm willing to have the discussion if there's enough people who want to do it. As for the proposals regarding the mayor's right to vote and the mayor's veto power, my general feeling is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm not sure there's a big hue and cry from us as policymakers or from the public for the need for this. Having been on the council for more than 12 years, I can't recall a single time when the veto power was even used. So I'm not sure it's a problem. And I suppose there may have been just a very small handful of times when there might have been a tie vote if one of our council members wasn't present or abstained. But it's so rare, and we already have an odd number of council members. I'm just not sure we need to have the mayor have the power to break a tie vote. And I think it could potentially change the nature of the mayor's role in a way that, you know, we haven't necessarily contemplated all of the unintended consequences. So again, I'm just not sure there's enough reason to proceed with those. With absentee ballots, I had a bit of a question for Lynn, bit of a legal question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, Lynn, but the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling, I think back in April, when there was a lot of confusion and controversy in the state of Wisconsin over their absentee ballot primary. The U.S. Supreme Court, in its ruling, required the state of Wisconsin to accept any absentee ballots that were postmarked by the date of the election. Meaning, if they arrived a week late but were postmarked as of the date of the election, they still needed to be counted. And I believe, it's my understanding, that the state of Maryland, just to be safe in response to that Supreme Court decision, arranged the same rule for our statewide primary that we're having tomorrow, to try to make sure that they were in compliance with whatever legal rule the U.S. Supreme Court might have created with that Wisconsin decision, so that any ballots that are postmarked by June 2nd in Maryland will be counted, even if they are received by the Board of Elections much later. And so the recommendation from our Board of Supervisors of Elections, which was made prior to the Supreme Court decision, seems well-intentioned. I'm concerned about not being in compliance or risking not being in compliance with some new sort of court-articulated rule of law that might require our absentee ballots to be accepted up until as long as they are postmarked by the date of the election. I know there's probably an argument that the Supreme Court's decision in the Wisconsin case was limited to that specific circumstance. It was fact intensive, but I am a little concerned about that. And so, again, I guess I'm sort of reluctantly willing to have the conversation and move the introduction, but I really want to have a better handle on this legal issue before we try to go ahead and make changes to the deadline by which absentee ballot needs to be received. Because I think under our current version adopted in 2018, as long as the absentee ballot is postmarked by the date of the election and received within 2 days, it gets counted. I guess the question is whether under this new Supreme Court decision we could even, impose that cap of 2 days. I mean, I guess you have to put a cutoff somewhere, but I'm wondering how that's impacted, if at all, by this new decision as well. So maybe staff could look into that if we do decide to move forward with introducing that change regarding absentee ballots. And then the campaign finance report changes seem like a no-brainer to me. As someone who's gone through this process many times, I always found it frustrating that the reports were due the very next day after the close of a period of receiving contributions or making expenditures. It just made all the accounting very stressful because you had to include everything up to the last minute before you filed a report. And as we said at our joint hearing, the state Board of Elections already has a buffer period built into its reporting process. There's no reason why we shouldn't have that few days as well. And then finally, the world has changed with respect to the vote by mail issue. And I imagine that when we have a more thorough debate about this, we'll really have a lot more insight about whether, how needed it is based on what we've all gone through this year. So I fully support collecting the information about the state primary tomorrow and taking our time and looking at it and having a deeper discussion about whether that's something down the road we want to adopt. We do have a little bit of time here because our next mayor and council election isn't till the fall of 2021. We don't want to wait too long because we know staff will have to do a lot of prep work. But I think we've got a little bit of time to at least see how it goes tomorrow and in the weeks and months after tomorrow and get some better information. So that's where I stand on all of these. Thanks.
Next is Mike.
Okay. I'm pretty much in agreement with what Ryan just said. He must have seen my notes. So actually, so the one that I'm most curious about is the two items on the mayor's vote, or lack thereof currently, and the mayor's veto power. These seem like solutions looking for a problem that doesn't exist. I've been on the council for 2 years longer than both you and the mayor and Ryan. And in that period of time, there's only been one threat of a veto by the mayor. And that was before either of you were elected. And I think maybe less than the fingers on a hand of the times that there was a tie vote in that period of time. So I'm not sure these are necessary. I think the mayor actually has quite a bit of influence and power even without the vote. So I'm not particularly concerned about that. I can support just about everything else. I agree with the issue about the postmark on the ballot, given that the state of Maryland has done that. I don't have any problem with a window in which those votes must be received as long as they're postmarked by the date. But I think, you know, we've already been there, and as Ryan said, that may be subject to challenge. So I think right now the polls have shown that over 80% of the American voting populace has no problem with voting by mail and would like to see it implemented quite across the board. So I think, you know, we're going to find that out, and we're going to find out how successful it was in the state of Maryland, how successful that will be after tomorrow's election. We'll be able to get some feedback on that. Hopefully there'll be some interesting data to look at, information to look at by the time we talk about this after introducing it. So, you know, I'm pretty much where Ryan was, except for those two things involving the mayor's role in the charter amendment. Thanks.
Actually, I think you and Ryan were on the same place there too.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Lynn. You know, I generally accept the recommendations of both. I know, particularly on the issue of absentee ballots and when they should be counted and received. And I think it was Mike and I that were pushing for as late a date as possible, just to allow for the enfranchisement of as many voters as possible. However, I understand the complications of logistics, and so, you know, I would support its introduction. On the issue of giving the mayor the vote, I think I was the one who brought that up. I would not be in favor of removing the mayoral veto in place of a tiebreaker vote, because that weakens the position of the mayor itself. The veto is a much stronger tool than a tiebreaker vote. And so, at least for introduction purposes, I would suggest introducing it at a much broader point and allow us to then work from there to either narrow it or, as I think my colleagues Mike and Ryan have at least initially indicated, maybe one or both of those gets after introduction does not go anywhere. So at least for this point in time, I would suggest that the language of the resolution be amended to read. So for section 1, where it says section 8 of the charter of the city of Gaithersburg be, and the same as amended to read as follows, I would recommend the language at introduction read: the mayor shall serve as the president of the council. He or she may take part in all discussions of the council and shall have a vote on any decision by the council. And so that would be the broadest you could have it. And then it would allow us to talk about whether or not he would have votes in specific situations or no vote at all. And so that would be my recommendation. And I can make that amendment later if at least for this introduction, we're willing to consider something more broad. For the question of lowering the voting age, Ryan, I think, hit the nail on the head with respect to one of the major concern is there is going to be the logistics. And so when we go to discussions on the subject, I would really want to key in on staff time, efforts, the cost of implementing such a provision. Because I think that will weigh heavily in which direction I would vote on it. Because it is, in essence, you're going to have to set up an entirely new role outside of what comes from the county. But I would suggest two things: that if we are amenable to setting up that separate role, that we look at two other categories of voters as well, and those are lawful permanent residents as well as members of the armed forces. And so I would suggest this language be put in an introduction. So we're at section 1, and it says that section 27 of the charter of the city of Gaithersburg be, and in the same is amended to read as follows. And then in paragraph A, where you start with the amendment of the age of 16, it says 16, parentheses, the number 16, years of age on or before the day of the next succeeding regular or special city election who is registered to vote, comma, or any lawful permanent resident or members of the armed forces who reside within the city limits regardless of their state of residence, and then shall be qualified to vote in said election. The reason I think the lawful permanent resident piece is kind of self-evident. Other jurisdictions in the area, Tacoma Park, Hyattsville, have adopted that kind of language. And so at least I'd like us to consider it. But for the armed forces, and this may be a quirk, is so if you are on orders to a state, you don't have to be a resident of that state. You are a resident of wherever you consider to be your domicile. So somebody can be a resident of the state of Texas, but stationed in Maryland, and they vote in Texas for presidential, gubernatorial, Senate, and so forth. And so for voting purposes, even though they live in the city of Gaithersburg, they receive the services of the city of Gaithersburg, they are not considered residents for the purposes of voting. And because we're at a municipal level and we're not at any of the higher levels, I would suggest that amendment. Now, this may be a Lynn question as to whether or not that's even permissible legally. But I would like to introduce it with that broader language, and then when we come back later and discuss it, if it's introduced, then we can have that question answered as to whether or not that sort of regime is in fact permissible. And then my third comment was with respect to the write-in voters. And I think I mentioned when we had done the policy or the work session on this, I recognize that the barrier is set very low, and it's 100 signatures, and people should be able to get over that barrier. The fact of the matter is that we have very recent evidence of people not being able to get over that barrier. And so in order to run, my preference is to set the barrier as low as possible to allow the candidates to get on the ballot. And so at the work session, I suggested a curing provision. Now, I think, Lynn, that the curing provision would be more liberal, so we don't have to propose language here today. But I think you would be, it would be, would we have to introduce the curing provision here today, Lynn, or is that something that can wait as kind of I thought in my head when I was thinking about this that the curing provision, if we were to say, for example, you have to have 100 signatures by X date, and then you were to put a comma and say something like, and the BOS will review it, and within 5 days they'll respond, and you'll have a chance within X days to provide the adequate signatures or something like that. In my mind, that seemed to be something we did not have to parse out now, but could parse out later.
Yeah, the only problem is that is in a different section of the charter that's not in the materials before you this evening. So that would be a whole new section that we would have to move forward for introduction.
That's something that we wouldn't be considering in this iteration anyway. We could look at it in a different context, is what I'm, okay. And that was my,
Okay, Neil, please.
Thank you. I think some of these concepts are worthy of introducing and proceeding with, and some of them I will not vote for introducing at this time. So let me go through the list of what we have before us. First of all, regarding write-ins, I'll respectfully disagree with my colleague, Mr. Wu, regarding the need to lower the barrier. That has not really been an issue in the past. Yeah, I think that I'm a big believer in doing your homework. And I'd like to think that gathering 100 signatures during a time of year when there are multiple public events is really easy. And getting out and meeting people and talking to the residents of the city should be a basic requirement of doing the job. And certainly I hope it's a requirement to get elected so that people know who you are and what you stand for. So the concept of the 100 signatures, which personally I got when I ran for president of my homeowners association, is not that hard to do, to get 100 valid signatures. So I think it's an anomaly that we had an election where a couple of people found that to be challenging. But you have a job to do here, and it requires doing homework, and it requires getting to know the people in the city. And I think it's very important, and I would stand by that. So, and I understand that there are people who believe that the reason this issue came up this year is because of the issues that were discussed in the last election. But it's really because we actually had write-ins in the last election, and we got to see firsthand what the issues and complications were. So I think that the Board of Supervisors of Election made some great points. It made things very complicated. I think should be a basic qualification of the job that you can do the minimal amount of paperwork that's required to get on the list. So regarding the voting age issue and the expansion of that proposal that Mr. Wu recommended as well, again, I think that's problematic due to the fact that I don't think the city is in any way prepared to set itself up as a voter registrar. It seems to be very complex. What do you do when people move in, move out? I mean, it's hard enough for the state and the county to keep track of the voter rolls as it is. And I don't think that's a burden we want to put on ourselves. And the jurisdictions that have allowed 16-year-olds to vote have found that while there's a nominal increase in the number of voters, it actually decreases the percentage of eligible voters who vote because the 16 to 17-year-olds vote at a lower percentage than other groups typically. So it would seem like a benefit, but I think from what I've seen and the reading I've done online, that the costs and risks and overhead way outweigh the benefit that we might get from that proposal. In terms of the mayor's vote, I'm not sure where the loss of the veto power even came from. I don't remember that being discussed in the previous discussion. Allowing him to vote as a tiebreaker seems reasonable to me. I mean, I can't recall any tie votes. It would almost have to happen because of an absence or a recusal. But I think it's a reasonable proposal, but loss of the veto, again, which hasn't come up in my 5+ years on the council, but it seems like a reasonable power to give the mayor if there's some legislation that's coming through the system that he really feels very strongly is problematic. So I'm comfortable allowing him to vote to break a tie, but I'm uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, taking away his veto power, however infrequently that is actually exercised. On absentee ballots, I'm in favor of the proposal by the Board of Supervisors of Elections. Having spoken to several members of the board, it's a hard enough job. It requires a lot of time and effort on their part, both before and during the election, as well as afterward, and requiring them to spend that much more time waiting for the last trickle of votes to come in before they can certify the election, before they can leave town on vacation or whatever might be going on, I think is again, it's it's more of a burden than the positive effect is worth. Campaign finance reports, I was probably one of the people that brought that up as an issue, particularly the one that's due on December 31st. I found myself having it slip my mind and reporting a few days late. I think if I could have done it a couple of days earlier, because I didn't have to wait in case some funding came in at the last minute, that would have made life a lot easier. So I think that's very reasonable. And in terms of vote by mail, I don't think that we're proposing anything going forward at this time. I think we're in the process of a proof of concept here. We'll really see how well it works in the United States and whether we can pull it off. I think it's a great thing. I know there are potential issues with the expense and again, the burden that it puts on the staff. But if we can get more people to vote who are eligible to vote, I think that's a great idea, and let's see how it goes. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, I think when it comes to the to vote by mail, it's ultimately the question is not going to be before us is not going to be whether it works logistically, whether it's secure. I think the question is going to be whether we believe the cost is justified in doing it. So ultimately, I think that's the discussion we're going to have, because clearly if it doesn't work perfectly this time, the way we all see it with the state, at least it's going to be very evident how to make it work. So I just feel like the logistics will work themselves out with that. So Lynn, we need introductions tonight. You've heard from the council how, I'm not sure we have, a clear picture on every single item here. Do you need that clear picture for the introduction?
Well, I think as for the introduction tonight for the charter changes, you will need to move to introduce each of those separately. So I think at least on the charter changes, those will give some clarity to those issues. And I know certainly there's been some discussion of some revisions, and if there are the council's will to make those revisions, that should be part of the motions. For the Chapter 6C changes, those can be done all as one motion. So if there's concerns about specific provisions, those should at least be discussed as part of the motion.
Okay, I'll tell you what then. Council members, raise your hand if you would. I'm just going to take these in order. In terms of the mayor's right to vote to break a tie, raise your hand if you would want to introduce that. Okay, I see 2. All right. Then Section 11, which is the veto power of the mayor. Raise your hand if you would want to introduce to remove the mayor's veto power. Okay. Qualifications of voter, the lowering the voting age. Raise your hand if you'd like to introduce that. Okay. I see 2. Write-in candidates. Raise your hand if you'd like to introduce the board's suggestion that we delete the write-in candidates section from the ordinance. Okay. All right. Who'd like to make that motion? Well, Neil, go ahead. You make the motion.
So moved.
Who wants the second? Mike, please.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay. We'll call the roll. Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye, Mr. Mayor, with the caveat that I would like to see introduction of a curing provision in that other chapter that Lynn talked about at a later date. That was
That'll be a separate introduction then.
correct.
Well, I mean, raise your hand. You've heard Rob's proposal. Raise your hand if you'd like to introduce that.
Wait a minute. Don't we need public notice?
Yeah, we've been out.
Public notice. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I mean, we can bring that back at a future meeting, but we would need to provide public notice of that.
Okay, well, should we have nods of heads or guidance from the council as to whether they'd like staff to come back with that drawn out? Okay, council members, raise your hand if you'd like staff to come back with Rob's provision spelled out. Okay, not seeing that. And then we will move on to introduction of the ordinance to amend Chapter 6C. Who'd like to, what's the pleasure of the council? Mike.
So moved. Do you need
Okay.
more formal language than that?
No,
Right.
Lorianne.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
I'm sorry, which section? I
This
have
is
the letter and the number, but not what the subject was.
This is section 6C, so it has a number of provisions. It deals with the write-in candidates, the time for campaign finance reports, and then also the absentee ballot issue.
All right, aye.
Okay, Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay. That is introduced. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn, do we have anything from the city attorney?
Nothing further.
Okay. And Doris, anything from you? I'll put you on the spot. Okay. Then we do have this statement that Chief Soroka sent to me to share with the public. And so I'll read that on behalf of the chief, whose job we very much appreciate, particularly in highly emotional, highly charged situations like today when we have a protest in town. The chief says the tragic death of George Floyd caused by Minneapolis police officers has understandably ignited anger throughout the nation. We have seen the video depicting the cruel and torturous treatment of Mr. Floyd. People around the nation, including police officers, are infuriated with what occurred. This is a stark reminder of the work that remains to be done by all of us who strive for justice. Understandably, protests and demonstrations have taken place throughout the nation. Protesters have raised legitimate concerns regarding policing policies and practices ranging from the use of force to bias in policing to police accountability and transparency. These are issues that are rightly at the heart of any community's relationship with its police department and must be addressed. Unfortunately, some protesters turn to acts of violence and destruction of property, which only serve to distract from these concerns and further harm communities that are already suffering. The fundamental duty of a police officer is to serve people, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful people against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all people. Gaithersburg police officers are committed to professional policing by providing quality service and protection to all people in an efficient and competent manner, tempered with courtesy, compassion, and understanding. Our officers uphold the public trust through honest, consistent, and forthright interaction with all people in order to foster an atmosphere of mutual trust and cooperation, and by treating all people with dignity and respect. I want to reassure the community that regardless of the challenges the police and society face, the Gaithersburg Police Department will remain committed to serving and protecting the community. We will continue to be guided by our core values of service, integrity, and respect as we discharge our official responsibilities. The citizens expect it, and they deserve nothing less. So we thank our chief for that statement. And Dennis, unless you have anything else, then I will just remind everybody that we have a work session next week to talk about our stormwater program. We have 3 incredible Gaithersburg Book Festival programs coming up Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.